Hi everyone, it's me again, Nina Rao from Saving Wild Tigers. Some of you have met my guest who I have sitting with me in New York City in my mom's apartment. I've known him for many years and he remembers 1998 when I first traveled to India on a mission to find the people who are really concerned with saving wild tigers. And I found, I think, probably the most dedicated human being anyone would know. And his name is Dr. K. Ullas Karanth, PhD, and many other titles, I'm sure. And also author of this incredible new book called Among Tigers. Hi.
Hello.
So some of you met him when we did a benefit concert in 2015, and he gave us a beautiful presentation about his work in the field not only of forests and jungles, but also in the real world of following through with policies that help with actual conservation of tigers and their habitat, which involves navigating a tremendous amount of bureaucracy, but also dealing with the people who live around the areas of the park. Many of these topics have been touched upon by him, but also some of you met his daughter, Dr. Kriti Karanth, who recently was with us in New York, and many of you came for the benefit and the fundraiser. So thanks for joining us again. I'm delighted by this book because it encapsulates, and I'm sure he's going to write more, over 5 decades of work in this field with single-minded focus on saving tigers. So Ullas, I'm sure you've been asked this question many times, but can you tell us why it is, as a young boy who was drawn to nature, you then changed the course of your life from being an engineer, as was expected by many of us from South India, to doing something like this, and how you became a trailblazer in this field?
I think the interest in nature, the spark exists in all children. The formal schooling system typically, particularly in India, kills that interest. So luckily I had a father who was a writer who nurtured that interest in me, read me Jim Corbett's books, and we had exposure to magazines like National Geographic when I was growing up. So all that kept that flame alive. But then to earn a living, I had to have a job, and this wasn't something that you could earn a living on. I'm talking of 1964 when I got out of school. So I ended up learning to be an engineer, as engineering student, but my heart was not in engineering. I read an article by Dr. George Schaller in Life magazine, and he did the first study of wild tigers in 1963-64 in Ghana. And in that he showed how exactly like in engineering, you ask questions, you collect data, and you solve problems, you understand tigers. So at that point, I decided that's what I wanted to do in life. So ever since then, I kind of steered my career gradually towards it. I worked as an engineer for 3 or 4 years, then I farmed for 8 years. Meanwhile, I kept observing, wandering in the forest, writing about natural history, and eventually ended up meeting Mel Sundquist, who was a professor in University of Florida, and he was the first person to radio track tigers in Nepal in the early 70s. So he took me on as a student, and at the end of when I finished grad school, Dr. George Schaller came to Florida, and he liked what I was doing, and that's how I got hired by Wildlife Conservation Society, which also runs the Bronx Zoo. So 30 years I worked for WCS, so whatever I did was also a part of my portfolio in WCS. But I had a stable income and support from a big institution, so I was able to achieve a lot because of that.
Mm-hmm. So when you first went into the forest, you said you wandered around the forest for 5 years. Did you have a guide or a mentor? How did you learn to understand the jungle?
No, this was in the 60s. Wildlife was on its last leg, so I would just take a bike and go to different areas hoping to see a tiger. But I almost saw tigers go extinct at that point in time. They were nearly extinct in the Malnad landscape, which is now has probably one of the largest wild tiger populations. But they were on the verge of extinction. And I had some mentors in the forest department. My cousin Sham Sundar, who was a senior forester, and Mr. Chinnappa, who was a forest ranger. So these were people who helped me get around the forest. So I learned field biology in the field, fieldcraft in the field, and learned the wildlife science later, but they came together nicely when I did that.
Right. Are there still those types of people working in the forestry department in India, would you say?
No, there are good people in the forestry department, but they, like anywhere else in the civil services, the proportion of good people has come down drastically, and there's a lot of money, and that often is not a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Something I talk about it in the book also.
Right.
Yeah.
So, in other words, I guess I'm trying to understand why it is when there is more money that's put towards the cause, we're finding a decline in a true interest. You know, one of the beautiful blurbs of your book, I think this was from the head of the Kenya Wildlife Service. One of the phrases he uses was your deep compassion for wildlife. And that really caught my attention because it's not a word that's really used in science very much. So can you explain a little bit to me about that and how it is that you've kept, there was something that drew you to this and it's kept you focused in this way for all these decades?
It's essentially a fascination for nature. It's a very selfish thing if you look at it. I like watching animals, so I'm happy in this job because it involves watching tigers, watching animals. That's what drives me. Yeah. The analysis comes later that they are threatened, I need to do something. That obligation comes later. What is central is this passion for watching animals.
Right. And given that we have so many television shows on TV, Netflix, National Geographic, whoever, incredible programs where you can see animals up close, I find a great disconnect that people cannot seem to relate to the fact that these animals actually live on our planet, like on our land. And then people who are working specifically in the field of wildlife conservation, whether it's the forestry department, still don't feel that connection.
I would not say nobody feels the connection, but the role of the media in all these documentaries, they often show the beauty of the nature and wildlife, and which is good, which gets people hooked. Yeah. But then the next step is where the media and this high visibility wildlife is going completely off track, is in terms of proposing any solutions. So, you know, there are all these dramatic stories, mostly about captive tigers, and you know, they don't analyze the problem and say, this is the problem, this needs to be done. Right. That depth is not there in the filmmakers or the media. It's not that there aren't enough films, but they don't go deep enough. So it really, that to me as a scientist, as a former engineer, solving the problem has to be a logical process based on data, science, while the pursuit itself may be driven by compassion.
Right. That's a beautiful way of saying that, actually. So let's talk about captive tigers versus wild tigers. You know, many people believe that, I think I read this correctly, that there are 10 times more tigers in captivity than there are in the wild. Did I get that correct?
That is probably true, but see, captive tigers have no value. Because it's not, you're feeding them and you're keeping them in a confinement. The only value comes if there are really well-run zoos where they recreate the natural habitat, because nobody can go and see a tiger in the wild. It's not easy. So a well-run zoo exhibit with a properly managed population does communicate in 3 dimensions.
Right.
What a tiger feels like to children and spurs that interest. But that's a very small fraction of the captive population, like in the Bronx Zoo or some of these well-run zoos. For the most part, they are in menageries, they're used for entertainment, and the people go there to watch some kind of a fun rather than really appreciating how a wild tiger lives, what a wild tiger is. So captive tigers have a role where numbers are small, perhaps to hold populations and some subspecies that may be close to extinction. But that's the central thing about tigers is you have to see them where they are, with the rivers, with the forest, with the entire assembly of animals. So it's tigers like a flag. You're using that to save a lot of wild nature.
Exactly. I think that's something I wanted you to kind of explain so that people understand that the habitat of the tiger is a habitat for all kinds of species. Beautiful, charismatic ones that we recognize very easily, like leopard and elephant and other larger prey species as well, but even other forms of this entire canopy structure that's required for wildlife to survive. So I notice here that you say saving tigers in Asia. So you've worked outside of India as well, correct?
Yes, I've worked most intensively in India, but I have worked for a long term, more in an advisory role in Thailand, for example, and for shorter spells in Russia and Indonesia and other countries. So,
do you still feel that India is the most viable home for wild tigers anywhere in the world? Would you say that?
India has about 25% of the remaining tiger habitat in the world. 75% is in other countries.
Really?
So, but India has made more effort, more investments compared to any other range country. So obviously for that reason we probably have 65 to 70% of the wild tigers that survive. But the bigger picture to me is that whatever survives, about 5,000 in the world and about 3,000 in India, this is a minuscule fraction. Even with the remaining habitat, 1.6 million square kilometers of tiger habitat across the world, about 380,000 square kilometers within India, we can easily have 10,000 tigers to 15,000 tigers in India. We can have 50,000 tigers in the world. But we don't have a vision, we don't have a logical approach to getting there. That is the problem. But India certainly has done better, but Russia was doing fairly well, but they are very poor quality tiger habitats. They have a lot of it. Now I would say Thailand is next best to India in terms of efforts. India and Nepal were always ahead, but Thailand is catching up and they have some spectacular tiger recoveries happening, and they have a lot of forest and extensive forest, not fragmented like India. Large blocks of forest. So,
so there's movement allowed.
No, plus you have, for example, they have a western forest complex which is almost circular in shape and has as much forest as the Western Ghats, which is a linear strip. So it makes a lot of difference. And they are very serious. Thailand government and Thailand researchers, conservationists are very serious. So I'm optimistic about the tiger in Thailand also.
So one of the things you said is that 4% of the land in India is considered protected wildlife area. Is that correct? Okay. Yeah. But you think that it could be much larger than that?
It has to be much larger. 4% is just not enough for saving. We are the 9th biodiversity rich nation in the world. We can't save it all in 4%. So we have 10% under the government forestry department ownership, 10 to 15%. So easily we can push that up to 10% tiger habitats. And outside of that, if the land use changes, farming practices change, land use changes, in the long run, we may even have more space created for tigers. I think that's the way to go.
So that's an interesting way to look at it, especially in a country where there's a tremendous density of human beings and human activity. So one of the things you've done in the past and have done successfully is relocating people who live within these wilderness areas, let's call them, to areas where they can actually have a better living for themselves. And then you just let the land be so that it allows to regenerate on its own. And do you think that that's something we can continue to do in India? Is that possible?
It is possible. In fact, that's one thing that is very clear in the Indian government policy right from the beginning of Project Tiger. Pragmatically, people saw that mixing tigers, cattle, people, agriculture doesn't work.
Right.
It can't all be in the same place. So, limited amount of voluntary, incentive-driven relocation is a win-win solution. What we did was to work with the government to make that process more transparent, process more fair, and sort of advocate on behalf of the people so they get the benefits that are actually assigned to them by the policy.
Yeah.
So there's a tremendous scope for that. And there was a period when we were able to do that in Karnataka. And later Madhya Pradesh state has done a very good job of it. But it's patchy. It's not consistently followed like a diktat from the top, done properly, funded properly, people given targets. That's not happening. There's a kind of a mission drift that has crept into tiger conservation about 15 years ago.
So Ullas, you've written many papers over time as a scientist. You've published your works. And I have seen some of your other books also. You've written stories from the past. But I think many years ago I talked to you about you writing this book, and you were so busy at the time because you had so many other things that you had to publish. And after your retirement, you found the time to sort of gather your thoughts and put everything down. So can you tell us about this most valuable, the essence of all these years of your efforts, and tell us a little bit about what came through in this book?
Book was a synthesis of all the work that I did. There were different phases of my life. There was a phase when I was a farmer but an activist in conservation. Even before that, I was an engineer student who was interested in wildlife. Then came my 32 years of professional life as a trained wildlife scientist, where I went in to explore the world of the tiger, really understand, because you can't have conservation of any species unless you understand what its needs are. You cannot determine what's the best course for saving a population or a species unless you know what its needs are. So I started that way, and so a lot of my work was research, and that again brings you to the issue of how do you study tigers. You do need technology like radio telemetry, which didn't exist earlier.
Can you explain that just a little bit?
You put a radio collar on a tiger and track and follow it. That technology came in the early 70s. Before that, it wasn't there.
And you were the first person in India to use this?
Yes, in the first person in India to use that technique. But my advisor Mel Sundquist used it in Chitwan earlier. That's why I went to him and learned from him. So one is the technology part. Other one is the quantitative part, the statistics, the modeling. All this has to come together. It's not an easy, simple way of, kind of, I love the tiger, so I'll save it. Doesn't work. You need to know what you're doing, understand it clearly. So a part of the book is a mix of three things. One is tiger ecology, the methods that you use. For example, I was the first person to use radio telemetry. later when cheap automated cameras came, an idea struck me that government was counting tigers all wrong using tracks and didn't work. So I said we should use this photographic technique where the tigers take their own photos by tripping a beam,
Yeah.
and you can identify them from their stripes,
Selfies.
and then combine that with some fairly sophisticated models to estimate numbers. So all this, a part of the book is this, what you could call hard science. Whether I do it well or somebody else does it well, you get more or less the same results. But the conservation is different. It's because in addition to the natural variation which we are addressing in these through these modeling and whatever, the human factor comes in, because management efficiency, somebody's commitment to protection, conflicting pressures on the forest, dependencies on the forest. So conservation is more like economics. It has some element of the science, but it's also a dismal science in some sense. There is all these variations that come in. So to me, the hard science was the most enjoyable part, because that's what I trained for. That's what it combined my passion for watching tigers with collecting data and all. Conservation was really, it's not an enjoyable thing. You feel good if you win in the end, but the process itself is very, very difficult. You have to deal with people, you have to deal with adversaries. It's complicated.
Do you share any of those stories in here?
Oh yeah, a lot of it is there. But what struck me is that conservation, wildlife conservation particularly, it is supposed to draw from pure sciences, ecology, animal behavior, statistics, computer modeling, whatever. These are hard sciences and it draws in. But then it has to solve a problem by including all the human aspects. Now, it started as an applied field. Michael Soule and others who started the field of conservation biology saw it as an applied field. But as more and more universities and colleges started treating conservation as a specialized subject, it became extremely academic. And in the real world also, conservation changed. The field was originally dominated by hunters, naturalists, photographers, people who wanted, in some way were in love with the animals. Over time it became a kind of a cause with a lot of people coming from other fields without that deeper knowledge, but because it's a career. So what I found through these 50 years is that this instead of being an applied field, conservation has become a theoretical field with its own theories. And much of those theories don't make sense, because a lot of stuff I learned about conservation is like they say, what they don't teach you in Harvard Business School. So you can't teach conservation in a classroom. And there's too much academic classroom conservation going on, where you construct a world where all your theory fits in. But your theory has to fit in the existing real world. So that part, the messier part of conservation, also I've focused. So I've not written only about the tiger and its ecology. The way I have structured the book is because this is written for, not for other scientists. Maybe some scientists will like it, but it's meant for people who, a tiger strikes a chord across cultures. It's the most popular animal in the world, but people are also very poorly informed about the tiger because of the massive amount of nonsense and trivia that's in the media in the name of the tiger. So I want to hook those kind of people. So I have written it in a popular manner with all the excitement and heartbreaks or whatever. It's a very human story for the first 7 chapters, where I've laid out making observations and kind of tracking my own career from the time I was a teenager to the time I wrote the book. So it's nearly 60 years time span is covered in that. So the last two chapters are more prescriptive. So based on this, what do we need to do to bring back the tiger? Because right from the beginning, for some reason, this whole scenario of tiger conservation, everybody's become a prophet of doom. You know, oh, tiger's gone, it's going. And people have constantly predicted the tiger's extinction. Jim Corbett said in 1930 that they'll be gone by 1950s. And the whole world, Time Magazine, BBC, and all major conservationists said they will go extinct by the year 2000. They're still there. So, what do we learn from this is, it's a resilient species. If we do the right things, I argue that we can have not just 3,000 tigers in India and gloat about it. We can have 10 to 15,000 tigers in India. We can have 50,000 tigers in the world. There's enough room to bring them back, even in the present state. So, but I'm also equally clear the solution doesn't lie in the past, not traveling back in time, particularly denying progress to people. People have repeatedly voted for economic growth and progress. Regardless of the party in power, regardless of the country, people are seeking prosperity. And to preach poverty to them and glorify it like some philosophical exalted status, etc., that may sound nice in some academic environment, but that's not what will deliver conservation to the tiger, nor will it develop development to human beings. So conservationists have to work in a manner that interests of both are served, and people's need for education, technology, employment, all these real needs which they, as they lift themselves out of poverty, are addressed squarely. You can't say for conservation people should forego this. So it's the question of how you do that is really the challenge.
And you're saying this specifically in the case of India?
No, I'm saying this in the case of all developing countries.
So Thailand would be in
Thailand, China, Cambodia, they're all in different stages where you have a large number of rural people, large number of people who are poor, who are aspiring for modernity, aspiring for better incomes, education. You just can't freeze all this, because a lot of conservationists talk as though some 1,000 years ago or so things were wonderful and people were happy, living in some spiritually exalted stage with tigers as neighbors. I think this is a trip. It's not reality. So we do need to recognize that there are 1.3 billion people in India, and the world is going to plateau at 10 billion people in 2050, and we need to cater to their real needs and yet have enough room for nature. To me, that recognition has to come, because too many conservationists are proposing time travel to the past as a solution. I don't think it works.
But you think that this could happen?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you do it the right way. Okay.
So that's what I wanted to share with you. A life of dedication to this purpose, and also his positivity and optimism when things can seem really dismal, as he said. Thank you, Ullas.
Keep smiling.
And the book is available on Amazon, so please look it up, and you can get it in Kindle as well. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Wonderful being with you people.
SavingWildTigers.org. Follow us there.